Dr. Elaine Beaulieu, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's a lot of fun. So, this is going to be my first video podcast. So, I'm really hoping this is going to go through okay. And if it does, I will post a link, a YouTube link in the show notes. So, for those of you who are used to listening to the show on Apple or Spotify or on your podcast app, you'll be able to actually view us on YouTube. So, I'll post a link to that. So, again, thanks for joining me for this first video episode of Planet B612.
Well, it's my first as well.
Okay. Yes. So let's get to that. Actually, you're the host, co-host, I suppose, of a show called Beyond the Test Tube, where you interview various people and you speak about various topics in science and science communication. You're also a University of Ottawa assistant professor in the Faculty of Science. You've done a lot of research in the past, like you said, 100 years ago, on various things like inflammation, for example, which is to me extremely fascinating. And now your interests have really switched a little bit to innovation in education, if I'm getting that correct.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so why the switch?
Well, we all have different interests. Most people have several interests in their life, right? So I had a real interest when I was younger about research and lab science, and I still have interest in science, obviously. And as I grew older, I kind of felt like sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of felt like sharing it, and so I kind of jumped into education. I liked spending time with the junior faculty, or the graduate students in our lab. And so I thought, yeah, I think I'm going to do the jump into education. I thought that was really interesting and like a different thing for me to do. And I kind of got tired a little bit of working in the lab. I, I think I got a little bit depressed, because things don't always work. And, using mouse models that take a long time. And then if it doesn't work, then it's 6 months. You're just
Yeah.
lost. And it can grate, right? So yeah. And the whole research kind of culture where the competition is so fierce, right? That kind of, there's not one atom of my body that's competitive. So it wasn't me in the end. So I couldn't fight with tooth and nail in order to develop my own lab. So I thought and I liked education. So I went, I'm just going to do that. And as I started teaching, I was like, oh, this is not what I don't know anything about teaching. So I kind of had to learn new tricks. And when I learned these new tricks, I thought, this is wonderful. I mean, there's a psychology involved in it, sociology, there's all sorts of things that, obviously was of interest to me that I never really dug into. So that was kind of like, oh my word, what a good switch in career. I was really happy with that.
I'm sure it keeps you on your toes. So you've been a professor for how long now?
Since 2013. How long is that? So
Okay, so
it's
like 8
only,
years,
so it's only been 8 years,
8, 9 years, yeah.
really. Feels like a lifetime, to be honest.
So, but prior to that, you were a researcher, I guess.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
I never had my own lab, but I did my PhD in Manchester in the UK. And then I did a postdoc in beautiful Melbourne in Australia. I was really lucky to get there in a
Wow.
wonderful lab by Professor Eric Morand, who was an absolute gem of a boss, really. But it was a wonderful experience. It's just that at some point, and then I came back to Quebec after that because we thought Australia, as beautiful as it was, it was really far. And so we decided to come back to Canada. And then I tried a little bit of a lab for a while, and I was in a really good lab, but I didn't feel like I was pulling my weight as much as the young ones who were really getting into it. And I thought, and I was really liking spending time with the students instead and trying to help them out instead of doing my own project. So I think I went, oh, well, maybe teaching would not be a bad idea. So yeah.
Cool. So I brought you on the show because I've been on your podcast, and we talked a little bit about post secondary education, mostly the problems that we see with it in terms of how we could improve it. Of course, I shared my opinion as somebody who was a seven-time dropout. Back then, I didn't have any personal experience being a university professor. Now I do. I come to it from. It's interesting because I don't want to share my personal experiences as a professor, but I do want to share what I have heard in circles of academia, because the funny thing happens when you become a professor is that people open up with you because now you become part of the
You're the
group.
gang.
You're part of the gang, you suffer for academia, along with everybody else. But the things that I learned intimately from my experiences in speaking with people around the world, because most of my followers on Twitter are academics. And so there's this kind of like worldwide collaboration, as we've already discussed about Twitter, especially science Twitter. There's all sorts of academics on Twitter. But there seems to be issues that people have in common, and I've really divided this podcast episode into a few subjects, a few categories, and one of them is to speak about the staff experience, professors, and then the experience for students and how both of these could be improved. Because if we're not making constant improvements, then we're just going to stay in old, archaic, traditional ways of doing things, which might not reflect what the future needs. Um, so, first of all, let's talk about staff and professorship and things like that. I wanted to know before we start into that, are you a tenured professor?
No, no.
Okay.
So my position is contractual
Okay. Yeah.
contract.
Yeah.
And it's only been in negotiated this year that the people in my position, which we traditionally call science lecturers in the Faculty of Science, who have been in position. So I've been there for 8 years now, but others have been there for 13 years. And you think,
Wow.
they
Yeah.
kind of, and they had to renew contracts every 3 to 5 years, but they were considered in all other capacities as full-time professors. But yeah, this year they've negotiated that we'll be just able to apply for permanency, and that should
Okay.
take care of it if if
Yeah.
everything
Just
goes well.
I want to clarify for people who are not familiar with academia, but usually the aim of a professor is to become this, like, what's called a tenured professor, which is really almost like a golden job opportunity, because you really have a protection to almost say anything, do anything, research anything. It's really kind of like a permanent, like you said, a permanency. You become a permanent member of the university staff. So, is that still something that young professors aspire to become? Is tenure really the ultimate goal?
Well, I can't speak to everyone, but who wouldn't want a permanent job,
Hmm. Right.
right? But the other thing is that with um, the type of work that you do, you need to be free, like thought of, to be able to say, research, and, kind of discuss things. And that's the whole point of being tenured, is that so you've shown that you're efficient, you work well, and you pull your academic weight around the institution, and you've proven that you're a good scientist or a good researcher or a good member of your academic community, and then you can actually be free of, so you there's no like we say in French, épée Damoclès. I don't know how to
Like a
translate that.
repercussion?
So yeah, well, obviously, if you do something completely awful, there
Yeah.
would be repercussion, but they can't be because you kind of publish a piece of of science or a research, whether you're in social kind of social sciences, economics, or whatever it is, that is contrary or is new or is kind of like, it's kind of, shaking ideas that you won't. So you have the freedom to do that. right? You
Which
have
would
to,
be like back in the day when they used to argue a long, long, long time ago that the earth was round, and that was, a big deal back in the
yeah.
day, "Oh, no, no, it's flat," and now
Well,
it's
you
kind
can't
of
be done
the
for
opposite.
heresy.
Yeah, you have professors have amnesty for saying the earth is still flat, but it is, like you said, it is, this amnesty, I think, is the right way to describe it, and the reason I'm asking that is because you have this weird system that I wasn't aware of until I actually became a professor and started, learning more about how structure works in academia, which is you have the adjuncts, you have the assistants, you have the associates, you have the professional
Full
professors, you
professor,
have
yeah.
all of these, kind of, hierarchies, if you will.
Hierarchy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and one of the ones that really concerns me is the young adjuncts. I think I brought it up on your show, which is that I'm hearing that, they're graduate students frequently or just graduated with a PhD or whatever, and they're in an adjunct position, and they're paid, like, 20 grand. They're I mean, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, that's a big concern where, these adjuncts are essentially not being paid very well and being overworked, with the kind of promise that, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, if you keep doing this, we'll give you something better later." What do
Yeah,
you
I
think
think
about
it's
that?
different. Yeah, I think you're right. I think but it's different in different disciplines. So
Right.
it's not quite the same in science. So in adjunct in science, as far as my experience goes, is somebody who has a full-time position elsewhere, but is associated with the university. So has certain tasks, like have for example, they can be examining thesis for master's students or PhD students, and or they could be giving away classes, or they participate in some of the academia in some way, but they have their full time employment, and they're just kind of recognized as being a member of the outside of university community who can contribute, so they're not paid actually at the university. It's
Okay, that's
it's like
interesting.
a some sort of limited partnership, if you want, right?
So maybe then the word I'm
If
not
you're an
using.
adjunct, you can have a graduate student in your lab. If you're a person who works at the OHRI, for example, which is a
Mhm.
hospital in Ottawa, but you don't have a position at university, but you can still have grad student because you're an adjunct, right?
Okay. So I guess the
So
the
it's
word I'm looking
different.
for is the newly minted PhD who's starting. I mean, I've heard the word adjunct, and that's why I brought it up, but maybe that's different in the United States. A lot of my contacts are American, so I hear a lot of and on TikTok, you hear a lot of TikTokers now who are coming out and saying, "We are having to take second jobs because we're not making enough money as professors." And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because there seems to be a problem in the way that money is just distributed in universities, where perhaps being a professor is not as great of a career for somebody who just did 8 years of education.
Well, yeah, so that's true. And I think that's because the number of students is getting higher. It's expanding every year at university, and the number of professors hired does not reflect that. And in order to deliver a lot of the courses, it's part timers. So part time professors is probably what you're looking for here in
Yeah,
Canada.
yeah.
So adjunct system in the United States, actually, I don't know it very well, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that. But here in Canada, you have sessionals. So you can have a postgrad or a PhD sometimes, but normally it'd have to be a postgrad in order to be able to um, teach well, in science. I don't
Mhm.
know about other fields, but in science you would have to have a, probably a PhD to be able to teach a whole course, and
Mhm.
then you paid for that particular course however long it takes you, so it's about 8 grand, right? And
Right.
teaching a first course, like a full 45-hour course, is more than, yeah, so you don't reach minimum wage at 8 grand. So it takes a
And
long
that's, I
time.
think, that's, I think, a concern, and I've, frequently in the past called out universities for doing that because, here I am with a high school education working really, doing really well in technology, in a field where I didn't even have to do a university degree, and I have my friends and colleagues who are starving, essentially, trying to make it up the ladder as part-time, and, and so that's something I just wanted to bring up on the show because I think it's a tragedy. I think it's something that the university systems need to fix, and I'm hearing that they're
The
using
thing
more
is,
and
I
more
don't think it's
part-time.
the university's fault necessarily, because
Okay, so tell
universities
me.
actually are trying to survive.
Okay,
They're
okay,
being squished and squished and squished. And, like Ontario is the worst province that is actually taking funding out of post secondary education virtually every year. They're squeezing the money, and this is why in Ontario the tuition fees are higher than everywhere else in Canada, because the government is not funding post secondary education the way other provinces are funding theirs. So if you look at
interesting.
Quebec, for example, then professors are not paid as well as they are in Ontario, like full professors, or people like me, for example, who am extraordinarily lucky. But then the cost of living is less in Quebec, so it all kind of give and take a little bit here and there. But the tuition fees for the students are really low compared to Ontario. So I don't think it's the university system per se. The university is trying to survive, so it can't actually have as many professors as it would like to have, ideally, because it has to hire people that they pay a third of the wage of a professor in order to be able to teach all the courses that they actually gathering. And if you think about the science, at the University of Ottawa alone, we have about, I don't know, 2,000 science students, maybe, like at least coming in first year. They don't all graduate. That's they just veer off to different kind of programs, and that's okay. But the retention is still quite high. And Carleton, the university right next to us, also have hundreds of students. Toronto has how many thousands of students? York, Western, Guelph. So how many students in science do you need? So it's offer and demand, right? So the PhDs in science are a dime a dozen.
Right. Right. So I guess the solution to that problem then it would be to just petition the government for more funding for the universities. Is that what you think would be
There's
best
that.
bet?
There's federal government for more money for research, which is like,
Mhm.
if you compare it to all the other Western countries, is peanuts
Yes.
to GDP.
Mhm.
So Canada is not funding science as much as other countries are, and we're not fund well. So our education system is well funded compared to other countries, I'd say, but still, it's still constraints because the tuition fees, we're trying to keep them as low as possible, which is, I think, is a good principle, so that hopefully everybody can go to university. But that's still not true at this point, because the
Yeah.
tuition fees are quite high. And so yeah, so, and how many people do you need to have in university to do a science degree?
Yeah, so it is something I just wanna also, most of my listeners are Americans, and, so we're talking about Canadian universities, which are largely, I think all funded by government. I don't even know if there are that many private universities in Canada or if there are any. But, so for us, the situation is different, where I think the Americans might, take objection is when they're talking about their privately funded universities that are paying them peanuts, but I think that's a topic for another day. But what do you see? Because to me, I brought up salary as the first thing that I keep hearing from people. You as a professor, what do you see as the main issues that are challenging for staff in universities in Canada?
Oh boy. Uh, so I think one of the main issues now is having stability.
Mm,
So there are like universities who do 1 year contract. So you've been teaching for 15 years on 1 year contracts. I mean, come on, you're gonna need me next year as well. So just give me a job that I don't have to reapply for my job every year, or come Christmas, because I know I have to redo my job in January. I just hope, you know, for the Christmas wishes that my job is going to be renewed, because who knows, right? The Laurentian just tanked it's like a huge amount. So you never know really what's going to happen. But so, yeah, so job stability, I think, would be one. So working as sessional is, you can work in three different universities, do one class here, one class there, it's completely mental. So
Right.
those people, so I feel for those people who have, who are passionate educators, and the system is just treating them like garbage.
This
And
is
I
I
think
hear
it's
this
not
too.
necessarily the people who hire them. It's kind of like, we don't really have I don't know where the actual, who decides to make contracts or not contracts. I don't know where these decisions are made. But that is actually, I think, what's grating a lot of people.
Yeah, and I saw a TikTok video recently of a fully tenured professor in the United States who was only making, I think he said $50,000 a year, and he was saying how, and this was at like I think a smaller mid-level university in the United States, but what he was saying is that we need to start telling our wonderful PhD students who wanna become professors what it's actually like in the real world of being a professor, because a lot of them, including himself, was not expecting to have to deal with, the one-year contracts and all that stuff. So perhaps bringing this to the limelight, it's not to discourage students, it's to give them a reality check. This is what this is what you can expect, and perhaps become comfortable with insecurity, and you'll be just fine.
Yeah. The thing for me that's difficult is that I don't know how job stability actually works in other fields outside of academia, because I've always been in academia. So, when I was, so you do your PhD, and you're going to stay there for a while as long as everything's still working out fine. When I was doing my postdocs, it depends where you are, but in the UK or in Australia, they're jobs. So you get a contract for sure, but for 2, 3, 5 years, it depends on which kind of contract you're on. You're going to be, hired for that amount of time. And so you can actually get a mortgage. You actually have a pension. It's a job, right?
Interesting.
Not in the United States and not in Canada.
Mhm.
So those systems are different, which I think is where one of the biggest issue is for people who do these PhDs, and then you have to do what, 2, 4, 5, 5 years as a postdoc, and you're paid in Canada. Like, again, I might be slightly wrong here, but I think it's around 40 grand. That's the stipend per
Oof.
year for a science post grad. And they're very rare because it's much cheaper to have a PhD.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's no wonder. I used to joke because, I've known a lot of people who did their PhD in science, in various, topics in science, and who ended up on anti-anxiety meds because couldn't pay their bills, were stressed out, very, and it's, I laugh about it, but it's really a serious issue because it is a high pressure, even in the postdoc, it's high pressure, and then you wanna try to compete for a job and eventually maybe get a role as a professor if you can even find it in Canada if you're lucky enough.
But I
So
don't know
yeah.
how it compares to other like type of work. Like if you're a farmer, for example,
Mm.
I have no idea. That must be stressful as well, right? I have
Yes,
no
it
idea.
is.
I mean, maybe you don't
Yeah.
study for 10 years to be a farmer.
But
you
I
know.
think the expectations are different, like I can only compare it to my work in technology, for example. If I had the kinds of expectations that academia had of professors at my job, I would also go crazy. But I didn't have that in technology. I think the expectations are you bill for an hour that you work. You don't work for free. That's one thing in professional life is you never work for free, or if you do work for free, it's because you choose to do a favor. No, it's never expected of you. But you'll never
Yeah,
work, for
yeah.
$8,000 for a contract that's like 60 hours a week. That would never happen in technology.
I think that there's an aspect to it, is that it's kind of like a vocation, right?
That's what it is.
So
Yes.
it's like a vocation. So if when you go into science, you don't do it for the money. I
Yeah.
mean, because you're going to be disappointed real quickly.
Yes.
You
Yes.
do it because it's a passion and you
Yeah.
absolutely love what you do. And to be honest, being a professor is wonderful in a way that I'm not, um, I can do pretty much what I want. I mean, I have certain expectations of me for sure, but I can decide what I want to research on. I can, go and, as long as I can get funding in order to be able to research what I want, I can really go for that. And I can talk to people who are like me, in the same environment. And then I can go and, so I don't, so you're really free in what you're doing in a certain way, which
Yeah.
is, absolutely wonderful. And you don't necessarily see that in other types of so if you work for a company and you're programming games, right, you kind of have somebody who wants this game like this and you have to do it like that. And it doesn't matter if you're fabulous artists, that depending on how you want to draw something, this is what I want, so you're going to draw it like that, right? So you kind of have this freedom taken away in a certain, well, I don't know.
I
um
think that that's, highly environment dependent. So if, for example, you worked for a big game company like Ubisoft, for example, just any game company, Electronic Arts, Blizzard, it would be like that because they really have a vision in mind, but the startup companies don't. The startup companies will hire you for your creativity. So that's really environment dependent in a professional standpoint. But you're right. I think, we can't necessarily always talk about the negative things. I did want to talk about the challenges, but you do bring up something that is very, that's the university professor experience, is that it is a vocation. It's almost like becoming a priest. It's almost like doing something out of love that is
it's not a
non-tradition.
religion.
It's not a
It's
well, some people treat it like a religion. But
well, everybody each their
yeah.
own, but yeah.
But, but no, it is something that is traditionally underpaid and valued as a passion rather than a professional designation where you would be valued for your knowledge, which is, I think where people find issues with it. I wanna move on from this though, and speak about the student experience because to me that's where, you know, as a university dropout, I can only speak to the experiences that I had in the '90s and early 2000s. And, it's tough because I was a gifted kid in elementary school. I don't know if I told you that last time, but I was gifted, and for me, things were always too easy, right? So you get into university, they're super easy, um, often super disorganized depending on who what the program is or whatever. But I didn't it didn't work for me. University just didn't work for me. I ended up learning better on my own. So that's my experience as a student. So I didn't really last the full 4 years. I never got beyond year one. Um, but from your perspective as a former student and now as a professor, what challenges do you see for university students today?
Okay. So just before I answer that question, I just want to
Yeah.
make a small parenthesis here about the comment that I said about we have thousands and thousands of students in science. Do we need that many?
Mhm.
And that comment can be turned in, if thousands and thousands of people want to study science, they should be allowed to do it.
Yes. I got that, but I'm glad that you explained it. Yes.
So I want to make sure, I want to make clear that all the students I have, I don't think you're not doing the right thing in studying science. I'm just saying, your expectation of a career, it has to be reasonable and you have to know the competition, right? So I'm just
Yeah.
saying that. But anyone who wants to study science should be studying science if they want to, and they should be allowed and they should have the opportunity to do so. So I think having thousands of students in that sense is not a problem. But when it becomes difficult is for the student experience, as you say, because they are in a sea of students, then this quality rapport that you can have with professors is kind of not necessarily present. But I'm not sure whether students are actually wanting this. So I'm in a kind of, huh, because when I'm like super introvert. My experience as a student is I'm happy to sit in my corner and receive wisdom and think about it and mull it over in my own head. I didn't need to have like a friendship with my or like a mentor or a mentee kind of relationship with my professors. I didn't need that at all. So I didn't want it. I was not looking for this. I just wanted to kind of get to grips with the material and do it in my own way. So but then I think that for me the role is to kind of show the student, the different possibilities and the what's out there that maybe they didn't know of, and kind of try to make them think about it and how it can apply. So um so does it fit everybody? I don't think so. I don't think that for we're all different, and the way we want to receive information or the way we want to tackle certain subjects are different between different people. I don't know if you actually enjoyed going through high school because you finished high school but you didn't do university. Did you enjoy high school? Did a high school fit, or did you
Hated
have
it.
to go through it because you had to?
I had to go through it because you couldn't, it was one of those things back in the days, you had to have at least a high school diploma to get a job.
Yeah,
Nobody was hiring somebody who didn't have a high school diploma.
I think it's pretty much the
Nowadays,
same.
well, no, I would say nowadays you have to have at least a bachelor's for most non-tech jobs, let's say.
All right. Yeah, okay, maybe.
Yeah, in the
I'm
job
thinking
market.
because I've been scrolling down for jobs for my my teenagers.
Okay.
So, and I know that a lot of them actually ask for CEGEP, like
Yeah.
because I'm on the Quebec side. So for people who don't know what CEGEP is kind of an in between high school and university that we have this weird system that's like the sixth form
Mhm.
college in Britain. But so yeah. So yeah, high school is like it's just something you have to get through.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I mean a lot of people will tell you a bachelor's degree is what you need unless you're really entrepreneurial and you can
Mhm.
manage on your own. But
Yeah.
I think that nowadays, so one of the challenges that universities have now is because they're being told by the people who hire people that they're not actually forming the students for the jobs that they need. So I think being flexible, shorter programs, like professional development programs, micro credential certificates, all of these kind of should be developed a little bit more. So I think as a body of knowledge and as a keeper and finder of new things, the university work well. So the research and the core program should stay there. But we should also have satellite programs for people who don't necessarily need to do a whole bachelor's degree, for example, and you want to have something more applied or more flexibility in our programs to serve a different type of population. I think we could actually have something that's really valuable there, because I don't know if so there are technical schools like I'm thinking of colleges like the Algonquin College, for example.
Mhm.
Wow,
Or
wonderful
Ryerson.
schools. Yeah.
Even Ryerson, which is a technical university, I consider it a technical university. But I wanna bring up a point that you just made, which is that to me, I find it fascinating that universities are hearing that they're not, properly preparing their students
Oh,
for
totally.
the
Yeah.
working world, because one of the realities of students that they have to deal with is university marketing, which isn't always reflective of what they're actually offering. I'm hearing this from a lot of students where they said, "Oh, I studied marketing in university. I studied communications. I studied computer science. Oh my god, how many computer science graduates have I worked alongside that just did they weren't cut they weren't made for private industry because they learned how to become a computer scientist, but they did not learn how to become a developer for, software for applications, video games, etc." So as a fun little exercise, as when I was prepping for this podcast, I designed my tech curriculum that I would do if I was the dean of a
Computer sciences.
Yes. So I would have a computer science degree program for people who want to become computer scientists, because there are people who want to do work in data science, artificial intelligence. You need those thinkers, those mathematical thinkers. But the large majority of kids that I'm seeing going into computer science, they want to become web developers. They want to do video games. They want to do e-commerce. They want to do the things that don't necessarily require fourth year calculus. They don't need that. So this is what I would design for them. It would be called, like, perhaps like dev education. I don't know. But it would be 20% theory, where you would have theory courses in ethics, you would have theory courses in psychology and commerce. You would also have a course in the history of computing, because if you don't know the history of computing, you're bound to repeat the mistakes that have been made. And there have been a lot of mistakes made in technology. I think you can agree with me on that one. With As we're seeing with Facebook, and some of the mistakes that were made with social media and things like that. The rest would be 70% would be practical, and the practical programs would be developed by industry professionals with over 20 years of experience minimum. Because another thing that I'm seeing in the university systems is that when they hire professionals, is they hire a professional with 1 year of experience, and expect them to teach a full course load on computer technology or computer programming, and then 10% electives. Let them take a music class if they want to take a music class, or a religion class, or whatever. But I think the other thing that I would do if I was creating a technology program is it would be a 1.5 hour maximum class of teaching, and there would be a 1.5 hour sandbox every week, where you get to work on a project and have a professor there if you need them. Just like you, like for the independent learner, that's great because they can work in the sandbox class. That's just, how I would design it based on what I've seen in the industry. Graduates of that program, let me tell you, those people would be very ready to work in technology. So, um, you're coming at it from science, I'm coming at it from tech. It's two very different subjects, because in science, obviously, it's different. I would imagine that a biology program is properly preparing, I would hope, a student to work in a pharmaceutical lab. Are they not? What
It
would you
depends
think?
what the person needs to do in the lab, right? So I think that
Okay.
so so that's an eternal question. So what's the right balance between the Lego blocks and the playing with the Lego blocks that you give them, right? So the Lego blocks, I say, is the information that you have to have a certain amount of information in order to be able to play with this information, put it in different contexts, do so do transfers. So this system is working this way and that, and now I have another system because I've discovered another organism. How is that going to fit in that new? And then kind of be able to transfer this and use and kind of so what you're talking about is also application. So that's what you're talking about. So it's fine to know calculus, but can you apply this to do something that's functional, when you want to do a web e-commerce, right? Well, probably not. That's not what you need to do, right? So that's fine. But when you have a program that is for computer sciences or biology, you don't know where the student is going to end up. So you kind of have to put the all bases kind of available. And I think that any student who comes out of any science degree at any university would say, I'm probably going to use about 30% of what I've learned because my research is going to be so focused on this. I'm not going to use the schnitz that I've heard about, in my first year necessarily. And I'm just really going to focus on this particular thing that I'm going to get really good at. And this would be like a research position. If you want to work in a in a pharmaceutical lab, then what you need is not necessarily. So it depends at what level you want to work at. So if you want to develop new product, then you would need to do graduate researcher. You would need to be able to design hypotheses, design how to actually prove your hypothesis right or wrong. So you have the right experiments, you have the right techniques in order to do it, the right control. So you kind of have to understand the whole process of how this is, but you also need to be able to communicate with the people that you work. You also need to learn how to manage a lab. If you have funding, you need to. So all of this is kind of peripheral to what you have to do in your position, but it's never taught. So we hope to make them do group work, and then group work doesn't always work, and then they go like, oh, I don't want to work with that person. And as a professor, you have to say, okay, then who do you want to work with? Instead of saying, well, tough luck.
Yeah.
That person is awful, but you might have a situation where you have to learn how to, accept that the professor then would probably need to have skills in managing difficult situation at work and kind of discuss this with the student. But do we have time for this? No.
Yeah.
So this is what is always the problem. It comes back to time, and it comes back to you're trying to get an education for a mass of people in the basics of a subject, so that hopefully some of it will is solid, and they need to know how to use maths. And I still have students who don't know how to do percentage at year 3. It's
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah. I hear this from a lot of professors who are like, "Oh, my I have students who could write novels, and I have students who can't spell. Now, what am I supposed to do with this?" I hear this a lot. But, with regards to, the universities getting that feedback, back in the day, the university would have said, "If you want a job, go to college. If you want an education, come to us." And I think that that's,
Yeah, no,
now kind of strayed a little bit to where universities are starting to compete with community
yeah.
colleges.
Yeah, I think it comes down to money as well. So for example, the way that you see post-secondary education, I think there are diehards who will say, come for an education, go to university. And, what type of education are you talking about? They're probably thinking about a factual sort of education rather than, living on the street for 3 years is going to teach you completely different things, right? So, so so they're like the university is seen as this protection of knowledge, and this place where knowledge is accrued and kept, and there's a repository that can be transmitted from generation to generation and increased from generation to generation as well. And I think it's a valid way of seeing the university. I think it's a less dynamic way of seeing what a university can do, because I think it can do more as well. So technical college, like you said, are more in the present, and they're actually more quick to respond to the job market. My understanding of it is very limited, but I think they are quicker to respond to what the market needs, and they're more technical. So we'll show you how to do this well, right? And then that's perfect, because sometimes that's all that you need. So I'll show you how to make a really fantastic website. I'll show you how to do animation, how to blend it out. So, and then you'll have a portfolio, and then you can move on in your life, right? So those are really good things to do. But there's people now who think that there's those that are not as diehard, kind of pipe in your mouth, tweed jacket, thinking, well, actually, we can be more flexible. We can serve our community much better than we can. So there are universities who have, for example, developed um, learning for the third age. People who are retired
Mhm.
have plenty of time. They want to learn new things. They don't want to just twiddle their thumbs at home. And then they have programs for this, so they can see, for example, that we need more, we need more nurses. All right, then let's have like a really quick program that's tied in with the industry. So we give you a job, and then we at the same time we train you in order to be a nurse. So one day you're at work, one day you're in class, and then you kind of, so those would be much more flexible kind of services that universities could have a role with. But then who am I, right? So I have my view of my university, and the university is strictly limited to science and generally biology and biosciences more. Exactly what others are so MBAs were a good thing back in the day, I think, for getting people to, be in leadership positions in industry, and it worked well in Quebec to have people that were French speaking that were also, in leadership positions in companies. So I think there are roles that the university can play. I think we can be more mobile, but that it's hard to turn this machine around. This
It's yeah.
boat is just going in one way. It's like, come on, man, let's have little
Yeah.
boats that can go different ways, So it's really hard
This
to get
circles
it
back
changed.
it circles back to the original discussion about salaries and things like that, where, my American friends were saying that, just trying to get people paid properly, especially tenured profs a tenured prof should never only be making 50 grand. They should be making a lot more. But, that's again ingrained in these, antiquated, systems. Um, what about since I really did want to stay on students for a second here, which is distance
Overall,
education is something that, people have complained a lot about, especially students. I think it's been a little bit easier for professors to adapt. I think students, I go back to I talk to all my Uber drivers, and a lot of them are students, and I always ask them, How do you find it? Like, what do you think?" And they hate it. I mean, they hate it with a passion. What's been your experience? I would imagine that you must have been teaching via distance for a little while, eh?
absolutely. To be honest, it's quite mixed actually. So if you poll the students from the latest kind of studies that have been coming out, is that uh, some students would rather just stay at home and avoid the hour in the bus and the hour there and back again, and it's quite convenient, especially for early classes. So the quality of the courses that are being offered is quite different as well from one prof to another, because it's completely new, and some profs have more favorable to tech, for example, or different things, and generally it's made university easier. I think, I don't know if it's the online teaching, so grades have slightly gone up.
Mhm.
Because I don't know if it's because of the exams. I don't know if it's the possibility of cheating on exams, or if it's just because during the pandemic, professors, I think as a whole, but perhaps I'm wrong again, have kind of pulled back on. So they've been more flexible, and they've pulled back on content, for example, in
Mm.
their class. So I can't cover all of this, and one Zoom here, one Zoom there. I can't do it. So they kind of pull back on content. So maybe that this it's it's easier ish. I'm not sure actually.
It's
I
funny
might
because
be crucified by people.
No, but it's funny because, whenever I have a professor on, we talk about education, I always go to their Rate My Professor page because I find it amusing, and, I don't know if you visited yours, but I have, and what I found fascinating is that people think that you're a tough professor. Now, had I been your student, I would have loved you because I love tough professors because I found it challenging. I love a good challenge. I love beating the exam. I love, doing really well. Some students, don't. So do you consider yourself a tough professor? And if so, what's the good thing about it? What's the bad thing about it?
I think it depends when were the comments made. If it was 2013, probably. I think I mellowed quite a bit. So I think
Yeah.
I didn't understand why, this is the time that you have to give out a certain work. Why can you not sort yourself out so that you will deliver that on time? I don't understand that, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, meh, no, that's a
Yeah.
zero for you. And I mellowed quite a bit on that. It's like, okay, people have lives. Sometimes life takes over. So, I'll give you more time to do it, but come crunch time, come on.
I
And
think,
most
yeah.
students actually sort themselves out, so that's fine. And when it's really rough, then you really want somebody to be there and get your back and say, yeah, that's your life's a shit house at the moment. Sorry.
Mhm.
Sort yourself out, then I'll help you around, right?
Yeah, I think there has to be a just a milieu, as we would say, because I think back in the day, there were times when professors were just even, I would say, ignorant to the student's success. I mean, I've been in classes and I've heard of stories of professors that just didn't give a crap about the students. I've also seen the opposite where they were coddled to the point where they couldn't, do things by themselves, and, we see this a lot in the primary and high school systems. I did teach at the primary level,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
it carries on
at
through
one point.
university.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Where, at one point I was, helping out someone with grading, university papers, and I said, "Wow," I said, "this essay is full of spelling mistakes," and she's like, "Yeah, we don't mark those anymore." And so this is a problem, again, that I think we're seeing in certain contexts. So there has to be just a mediator because you're not preparing people for the real world either if the policies are too lax, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a constant struggle what's too lax and what isn't. And generally I'll err on more relaxed than not at the moment,
Mhm.
because it's just, the thing is, like, if I have 20 students, that's easy to manage. I have 550 now.
Yep.
Am
Yeah.
I gonna get hung up on every little things that happen? So I was like, no. So you kind of design policy to be as flexible as possible, so that logistically, so that students feel like when something happens, you got their back, so you're seriously there for them. And I think that's kind of where I want my students to what I want my students to feel in my class.
Mhm.
Right? I'm not here to punish you. I'm not trying to ram this thing down your throat. I'm just, I know you're a human being. And, sometimes, like, I don't know if I go with this muffin thing. I think somebody said this muffin comparison with the students, that they're all different muffins. And yeah, I have to cook them according to the recipe, for a
Right.
certain amount of time. Not all of them will have cooked by the end, and some will have overcooked before the end
Mhm.
of it, right? So, but they're all different. So I kind of have to sort it so that most people will have cooked in the end of term.
Right. Yeah,
But
it's a position that I don't envy, that's for sure.
so you try to be as flexible, which means that when okay, the thing is that students should you should have you should they should be partners in their education, right? So it shouldn't be just you educating them. It has to come from them as well. So this is something that kind of I I kind of had to work on, where I was kind of giving them this structure, and they had to, like, go through this structure. And if they didn't, then they were kind of pulled out out of the oven. but
Right.
but now I'm more of a, look, we're partners in this. I'm giving you this structure. I'm telling you all in advance, this is how it's going to happen. The communication, I'm weekly telling them, oh, do you remember, you have to do this and do that. And I understand that this actually helps me if I have an agenda that pops out on my Monday Windows, screen of my computer, telling me, well, this week you have this, because it's helpful. Sometimes you forget. You have so many things that you're juggling with your life, right? So if I
Mhm.
have my dentist telling me, tomorrow you have your your appointment. Do you remember your appointment? Yes, yes, thank you. No, I had forgotten. So I think that's helpful, and the students are like that as well. So
Yeah.
communication, as long as you communicate what you expect of them, and when they need to provide the things that they need to provide, I think most of it is there, right? And it's for them after that to organize themselves in order to achieve. kind of what is required, because you've ingrained so much flexibility. You can come to class, or you can watch it, because I record it, or you can just listen to the, without even watching it, or you can just redo the readings if you want, however it works out for you, do it like that. But at the end, this is the midterm, and it's going to be there. If if your house is on fire and you can't do the midterm, it doesn't matter. We'll put the weight of the midterm on your final. You don't need a medical note. If you have the flu and you have massive diarrhea the day of the midterm, don't go to the doctor to get a doctor's note. I don't want to know. You don't need to tell me. Just don't do the midterm. It's automatically going to be put on your final. So,
Right.
you kind of, yeah, yeah, your dogs died. I don't need to know. You don't want to do this work, but so the weight is going to be put at the end. So there's always a way to actually reorganize things. And
Yeah.
generally, the students are really receptive to this. They actually do the work. They try to do it well. You know, I'm not worried. Actually, when people say, "Oh, they're not ready for work" and all of this, and I'm like, "Was I?"
That's I was just, I was just about to say, to play devil's advocate, which is that, the what you just said about being a partner, and the student has to be a partner in their own education, is that it's not on the university to prepare you necessarily for work either. Because one of the things I just wrote about in a blog article, which is, if you're studying technology, computer science, and you're not learning how to code in a program that's high in demand in the industry right now, learn it on the side for your own education. That's not necessarily on the university, because they're going to teach you the foundation of everything you need to know, and that can be applied as well. So I think, yeah, I think that at a certain point you have to say, well, if a student is really keen on a particular career and they already know in the university they want to do XYZ, they'll learn what they need to learn from you as a professor. But on the side, they might read up on, something else related to your field. They might nerd out on they might buy their own microscope like me and nerd out and do their own thing on the side, which, I didn't, I this is all stuff that you can do. We have so many, I think, students today, you said that you record your lectures. I mean, we didn't have that. You couldn't, you weren't even allowed to bring a tape recorder into your lecture. You'd get kicked out. You weren't allowed to have somebody else take the notes. You had to attend, and if you didn't attend the lecture, you got a zero. You would fail potentially the class if you were not there every single class. So we have a lot more liberties today. I think as students, they have more adapt adaptability, accessibility. You can be a visual learner today. You can be somebody who, like you, is more independent, and I think independent learners can still learn pretty well today. So I think there's that. We're going to go a little bit over time here, because I want to talk quickly about the role of the university in the community. And the reason I want to bring it up is because, um, I think, like you said earlier, courses for seniors, things like, free lectures for the community, giving back to the community, being a part of it. Because my negative impression of the university, particularly in computer science, is the role of gatekeeper. Back in the day, you didn't need a computer science degree to work for the government. Now you do.
Right.
Women made a larger part of the workforce. Now they don't, because what happened is, at the dawn of computers being introduced in the household, boys were given computers at Christmas. Women were not. Girls were not. And so what happened is, when the universities started their computer science programs, all the boys were far more advanced than the women. So we saw fewer and fewer women going into the profession, because it was mostly boys going into computer science programs, and the universities ended up acting as the gatekeepers, as they do today. So I think we need to move away from that and go back to, the days where universities had more of a role in the community, and, like you said, targeting, um, you know, courses for seniors. Back in the day, I used to sneak into lectures. I snuck into, a neuroscience lecture at Laurentian. What was his name? Dr. Persinger. Do you know him?
No.
At Laurentian, he's wacky, he's crazy, but he's one of the best neuroscientists in the world. Anyway, I used to sneak into his lectures, and then I snuck into, like, film studies lectures. You shouldn't have to sneak into a lecture. I think that there's times when you should have open lectures for the public. What do you think about that?
No, I think it's a good idea. I think the thing is security, which is always a one that's,
Right.
quite
Yes.
difficult.
Yeah.
And so security is a big issue here. So you would have to register. I think people can't just walk into classes because, insurances and all the faff, the admin faff that goes with it. So for that, I think it's more difficult, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to. So we have special students, for example. So you can register as a special student and not follow any particular, you know, but people are paid so that university wouldn't want people to just walk in and, attend
Oh, no,
lectures.
I mean more like, seminars, like public seminars, like on various educational topics,
Yeah, I
religion
like that
in
idea
the East
actually.
or whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, like, one of the ideas I've had as in my coordinator of teaching innovation position is to actually at the beginning of the year, well, what we call like a school year,
Mhm.
would be to have like colloque de la rentrée, like a
Okay.
school back to school kind of forum, right?
Mhm.
Where for a couple of days or maybe one day, then people from the area, whether Carleton, New Ottawa, or Algonquin College, or everybody, so we could have a theme, right? So the theme this year is, I don't know, flowers, whatever. It doesn't matter. And then people would present research that has, to do with flowers, but for a lay audience. And then this would allow our professors to kind of present themselves to our students, for students to understand what's going on, perhaps for a graduate student to practice kind of their research as well, talking to a public, and then to have like an open day where people can come and visit the labs and, out of the community. So I'm hoping that this can be done. The difficulty is that I don't understand. So there's like I don't know how the university is perceived in so most of our students have parents who went to university, so
Mhm.
they're not afraid of university. And what I would really want to encourage is people who've never been to university to come on campus and say, look, it's not magical. Anybody can do
Yeah.
this. And that's quite difficult to do. It's probably easier for your university to come out, but it's probably more, I don't know, attractive to come on campus and feel like you're welcome, right? You can use our library, that's okay, right?
Mhm.
Right. So I don't know. I I've never really thought about how to engage the community more. The thing is that we're so split for time already, every minute counts.
Yeah.
So having the so outreach was never seen as a good thing, and it's becoming a good thing now. So if you
Okay.
were going to do a lot of outreach as a professor, that was never counted as like that's your own time, mate. That doesn't really count. It's whatever, it's wasted. That we're not going to consider that for a promotion or anything, right? But I think it's more and more appreciated now that this is what we have to do as universities in order to be able to kind of pull people in.
Yeah, I wanna talk about that really quickly here, but, I wanna mention, Nipissing University in North Bay in the '90s, in the late '90s, used to one of the ways they did outreach with the community is that they would have invited speakers, invited guests at the university. So, I saw, for example, Lee Maracle, who was an Indigenous writer, when she wrote her book, I Am Woman, one of the first known books at the time from an Indigenous woman's perspective, which was really cool, and I was not a university student at the time, and I went to that lecture because it interested me and it got me into the doors at NIPU, which was cool because I'd never stepped really foot inside there, So, I think having things like, special guests or book lectures or things that are not necessarily perhaps a class, or having, an astronomy teacher teach like, "Hey, here's a 1.5 hour intro to the solar system. Come on in." I think you would get a lot more members of the public, especially working class people who perhaps are mechanics and wouldn't have sent their kids to university, but now have more of a better perspective.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting. I mean, the things do exist already where people meet in the pub, and then there's somebody who's presenting, who's talking about a subject. I know there's one in Quebec, in Montreal, that is virtually every month, and it seems to be quite interesting. But I can't go because I'm not quite there. They used to do that here at U Ottawa as well, where they would have like a cafe, and you just be you could go. It's after working hours, so I think they do exist. There's not a whole lot of them. I don't know how well it's marketed, so I don't know who it reaches. It's probably the university population that it reaches, so that's a little bit of a shame for that. But it's very difficult to go into like I don't know. I mean, how do you market this, right? So where do you go to invite people in? Like
Mhm.
there's a whole lot of people working industry, or construction workers who might want to have engineers, talk about certain things. Or I don't know, or like you
I
said,
hate
an
to say it, but
astronomer.
Facebook is it's interesting. It's the I wrote a little blurb about this on LinkedIn the other day. It's that, everybody is like anti Facebook right now, pro Twitter from in terms of academia.
You've got
But
off. You've got off
what's
for like
did
20
I?
seconds.
Oh, sorry. Are we still good? I think we're still good
Yeah,
because
yeah, you're
we're
good.
still recording. So,
It's just,
um,
I think it's 5 seconds. It's okay.
yeah, okay. What I was saying is that there's a lot of anti-Facebook sentiment, but the working class is all on Facebook. There are plenty of artisan groups, working class groups. All of PEI is on Facebook. I swear to God. So because I'm moving there, so I joined a group where you can ask any resident any question. So like, where's the best dentist or whatever. So it's really interesting. So yeah, I think it is a. You're right. It is a marketing play, which brings me to the last topic, which is science communication, because we do have to talk about it. You do a lot of it. You mentioned that there's more acceptance of, and even I would say persuasion of scientists to do science communication. There are now grants to do science communication, which has never been the case in the past. I know scientists even in Ottawa who got grants to do science communication. So it's a whole new thing. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
No, I think it's great because we've seen that, there was a huge dichotomy in how we understand science and how we live in science and academia. It's really closed up kind of community. And then that doesn't percolate outside of our like little close knit community. So I think that obviously, even with campaigns for like information with the pandemic, that was atrocious. How can such fallacies can be going around the globe, but not the right information? And how do you present that information for people to be more palatable? I've seen a presentation on the news sometime during the pandemic, where they put one slide after another. I think there must have been 20 with figures, like graphs, and things going up and things going down, and x-axis, y-axis, not even labeled, and you didn't know what it was all about. It was like, and the person who was talking was they're just talking. They didn't actually talk about the whatever was being presented as a result. And that was like a whole class of result in this 5-minute interview. It was completely mad.
Wow.
And I was like, what are they doing? It was,
Well, that and
you
that's
know,
that's because the media, I think they what's the expression? Lost the ball or dropped the ball a few
no, I
times,
think it was
but
somebody from the public health. And it was like this TV presenter going like,
oh,
whoa.
oh. Do you think, because yeah, the pandemic is a whole other That's something that I think we could do a whole podcast episode on the challenges of
Well, like
communicating that.
pandemic aside,
Pandemic
science.
aside, let's move that, yeah, let's move beyond that because, I wanna give it a bit more concentration on the stuff that isn't related to the pandemic, only because there's so many criticisms about and challenges with communicating a pandemic, because the point is people have believed in pseudoscience for a very, very long time. This isn't new. Like, this fake news and this this belief in fake cures and all that, that's not new. The social media has made it worse and worse and worse, but it's also given scientists the ability to communicate the actual science behind things, whether that's during a pandemic, but also about, like I said, the solar system, microscopic creatures, weather,
Absolutely. There's
all this
never been that many
beautiful.
animations on YouTube about science
Oh
as there
my
is now,
god.
right? Whenever you want,
It's
there's an animation about it. It's amazing.
wow. It's
I didn't
really
have
amazing.
that. Animations didn't exist when I
Yeah.
was younger. And I never mind, even like simple diagrams. It was
Yeah.
just make it up in your head because it's not existing nowhere.
But also the one-on-one relationship, I'm not a scientist, but I consider many scientists on Twitter my friends now because I'm communicating with
It's
people
funny
that
for me that you say that, as if scientists were some other creatures living in another
absolutely.
world.
Oh, yeah. But they were, and you I think you even said it yourself, which was the university was kind of a silo for a long time, and even science in a way was kind of siloed from the rest of the world, and now
I think
scientists are blending in.
you're being generous. I think there was a lot of elitism. Elitism?
Yeah,
No?
elitism, yeah. Mhm.
And I think it's still there, to be honest.
Yes, I agree.
They'll never understand this. As
Mhm.
if science was, so complicated. The normal brain cannot penetrate its
Yes.
difficulties. It's ridiculous. But so no, obviously, that's not the case. And I think that more and more people who are actually going into science, that they don't have that sentiment. So
I hope so. I mean, I yes and no. I see it a lot on Twitter. I see, and one of the things that I mean, since we're gonna talk about the pandemic, but since we're on the topic, like it or not, the one of the things I do see on Twitter a lot from young scientists is talking down about people who don't understand, and that is I
yeah,
see as a
I
problem. I
don't
see
understand
that.
that.
Yeah, I
It's
see
like,
that as
oh, they don't know about RNA? Of course they don't
yeah,
know about RNA. I don't know how
yeah.
to change the oil in my car. Am I stupid? No.
This is what I'd like to get away from, where I think science communication fails dramatically is when you start inciting people to make it political or to make it about the person's,
Yeah, that drives me
intelligence
nuts.
or that
Yeah.
yeah, that drives me crazy,
This
and
condescending kind of,
yeah.
how did they not know this? They don't know because nobody told them ever.
And even when
Why
they
would they
did,
know? Who knows
one of the
about RNA?
things well, and one of the things that people's first experiences in science, if they didn't study it, is usually with a family doctor or a dentist. It's usually somebody in the medical field. If you've had a really bad experience with a family doctor, which a lot of people in Ontario have, you're going to start to distrust medical authority and by extension science. So I think we need to do a little bit more of outreach and build trust. Um, and how do you think would be the best way to build trust for science?
Gosh, I don't know. But I like this. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with you that trust is a big issue at the moment. I think that a lot of people are feeling like technocrats are ruling over their heads with things that they don't understand or they don't agree with, or they don't recognize that world, so they feel like disengaged from this world. And I don't think just science, I think generally everywhere. But so building trust, I don't know. I think it's just going out there and being humble and meeting people where they are, right? Instead of expecting to bring them up to where we think we are. Do you know what I mean? It's like I don't know. Meet
It is
people
the
where they
eternal
are.
question.
Respect people for who
Yeah.
they are and what they know. I mean, people are clever. the fact that they don't know something doesn't means nothing.
I had a guest on, I think yeah, it was a guest that I had on the show, and he was saying how, he never discounted people's intelligence, even if they were hard science deniers, because they spent a ton of time researching
Gosh,
things
yeah.
like flat Earth or whatever it is that they were passionate about. So it's not because they weren't intelligent enough to learn. It was because there was an obvious trust issue. So I think trust is really the big thing that needs to be overcome in proper communication of science.
There's that, and there's also making sense of your, logic also.
Mm,
So sometimes logic goes out of the window, and that's where I struggle the most, actually,
okay.
because if you don't, who is it who is saying that? If you don't come to a conclusion out of sense making, you can't come out of that hole without making with sense. Do you know what I mean? If you come to a conclusion that is not uh, based on something that makes sense,
Mhm.
then whatever your beliefs are, because at that point they're beliefs,
Right.
then you can't come out of it with somebody giving you sense, because sense means nothing to you. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, 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 okay. I know what you mean. So, essentially, if you don't believe something that's based in reality,
Yeah,
is
like
that more accurate?
if the earth is flat, if you
Yeah.
believe the earth is flat, you didn't come to that conclusion using sense. Okay.
Right. Right, right.
You and so whatever research you've done, it's just I don't know how you can come to that conclusion, but whatever research is done that you've done was based on falsities. So
Mhm,
perhaps you can prove those false and then take that person out of this kind of concept of flat Earth. But that's not what they want.
mhm.
So is it trust? I don't know where it comes from, to be honest. Or is it just, I'm a rebel? I have no
Well,
idea.
there's that too, and I say this as a rebel myself.
And there's such a minority of people, right? Most
Yeah.
people are like, is this really gonna hurt me or not?
Mhm,
And like, how true is this? I mean, people have done things really wrong with the limit limite before, and we didn't know, and it was horrific. And you telling me you've done all the tests? Really? Have you really done them? So,
yeah,
so that's the trust issue. So I understand that, and that's kind of making sense of.
yeah.
You know, so it's based on your experience and analyzing what's real, right?
Which is, yeah, which is a challenge for people who are not used to the scientific method or things like that either,
Yeah,
right?
if you can explain that, if you
Yeah.
can,
Yeah,
if
that's
you
that's the other
communicate it
challenge.
clearly, then that's
Yes.
good.
After all, science communication is about communication. It's not necessarily, I mean, it's a two-part term. It's science, yes, but it's also communication, which I think trumps everything. If you can't communicate it,
Absolutely.
it's not really getting the science across. So, use
Yeah.
simple language.
Yeah. So that kind of communicating to teach, that's not what people want. They don't want to be
Right.
taught. Entertain
Exactly.
me, right?
Yes, yes. Entertainment is so awesome. TikTok, I don't know if you've been checking out the science on TikTok.
No.
Oh my god, you should join TikTok after this recording. Your kids will probably tell you about it, but the
I should.
science on
I
there
will.
is oh, it's fantastic. It's just I had a science TikToker, Sarah, who,
TikToker. All
a
right.
TikToker,
Okay.
who joined me, and she does the science communication for the Guelph Turf Institute, I think it's called. Anyway, very, very, very great at TikTok and communicating it through memes, you use memes, popular
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
culture,
Yeah. Memes are
jokes,
fantastic.
it's great, and it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. Not everybody is a good communicator.
No. No. I couldn't make a meme to if I
Well, on that note, this is by far the longest podcast I've recorded, so I hope that my editors are going to be okay with this one. But I think we could have gone on and on and on. I think there's a lot to touch on in terms of both education, science communication, both from the standpoint of professors and students. I think it's a two-part discussion when you start talking about education. I think that it sounds like you're doing the best that you can with the tools that you've got, and especially with the distance learning challenge, which I think was hard for every professor out there. But it seems that you've adapted well to it. But anyway, I thank you again for coming on the show, and I invite people to listen to Beyond the Test Tube. And I'll put links to it in the show notes. So thanks again for coming on the show, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was great.
My pleasure.